All right, everyone, welcome back. We have had a really great morning. I'm getting a lot of emails. I was checking my emails during the lunch break and checking out the chat. And there are a lot of people who are really resonating with what our speakers have been saying. Early on in the day, we talked about just the need for early identification and understanding of kids who learn and think differently, particularly because Black children are often either misdiagnosed or under-recognized. And what that means is that they don't get access to the interventions that are critical for academic, for social, and for emotional development. And when we delay those interventions, students face chronic underachievement and are at greater risk for a host of mental health issues, which we're going to talk about at the end of the day. But I am thrilled to continue this conversation with both of you, and I'm going to introduce you both to our attendees for the conference. So this panel, we're going to really talk about how do we help children thrive. And what we'll learn from both Shanna and Wendy is that we're not only going to need to support the kids who are struggling and who also have amazing strengths, as we heard about through conversations earlier today, and we're going to use those strengths to help them compensate for areas of weakness. But sometimes the whole family needs support. And Wendy's going to talk about how we can help families set their kids up for success as well. So I'm going to introduce our panelists today for this session. So first we have Shanna Trombetta, who's a certified educational therapist. She has completed extensive training with a focus on dyslexia and structured literacy development, including Orton Gillingham, Barton, Lively Letters, Wilson Foundations, and Handwriting Without Tears. Additionally, she has training in Singapore math and zones of regulation, and over 20 years of experience as a classroom teacher, literacy coach, and private homeschool teacher. Shanna has extensive knowledge about working with neurodiverse children, children who have dyslexia and other language-based disabilities. And then we also have Wendy Zanders, who is a professional organizer and your declutter coach. She is passionate about helping the special needs community take their homes and minds from overwhelmed to simplified. She was an underperformer in grade school due to undiagnosed attention deficit disorder, which we've talked about earlier on today. Wendy worked hard and surpassed the expectations of everyone around her. And she currently helps the special needs community get organized by helping them identify what has created the disorder in their lives, in their homes, and helps them to create systems so that they can get back in control of their possessions and their homes. So thrilled to have you both here with me today and excited to get started.
So excited to be here, Karen. So nice to meet you, Shanna. It's going to be a good topic, good discussion.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Shanna. I thank you, Karen, for such a great introduction. I think our segue into this session was kind of talking about the differences between a tutor and an educational therapist as we're working toward getting support for our students. Is that correct? Looking.
I think one of the things is that parents are often offered sources of some kind of support, but they often don't know what that support looks like or what that support should look like. And I think, you know, one of the conversations I often have with parents is when they say my child has an IEP, and I say, well, what are they getting? They'll say resource support. And I'll say, well, what are they doing during that resource time? And they have no idea.
Yeah.
They might say, well, I'm getting a reading intervention for my child. What program are they using? I don't know. And so they don't know. Or some parents will say, well, I'm getting really great support. The teacher is meeting with my child who has dyslexia for 10 minutes a day before every class. So they feel like they're getting a lot of support, but that teacher might not be using an evidence-based program. And is that the appropriate intervention for a child with dyslexia in order to move the needle? And that's important because we know that a lot of interventions have been researched, and we know that there are specific types of interventions that can actually change the way the brain is organized for individuals with dyslexia in a way that makes them more efficient readers, more fluent readers. And when you're more efficient at your reading and you're making fewer errors and you're more fluent, then you have a better understanding of the text that you're reading. And we know that kids are when they're, in first grade, some kids in kindergarten, they're learning to read. But then by the end of second grade and beyond, they're reading to learn. And so when kids struggle with learning to read, then they never get to that stage where they're reading to learn. And that's where, all of the work takes place from second grade and beyond. And so part of what we want to do is help parents better understand, what their students need. When they see specific learning disorder in reading on an IEP, what does that mean? Is that dyslexia? Because schools can't diagnose. They will just give you a category of area of struggle or area of difficulty, disability. But we have to really be intentional about finding out why a child is struggling. Is it dyslexia? Is it ADHD? And then we have specific interventions in place to help kids. And sometimes parents will say, well, I'll just get a high school student down the street to help my child with their math because they're struggling with math. And if it's a math disability, you might need some specific type of support for your child. And so that's why I was so glad to have you on here, Shanna, to start things off. And then we'll move into you, Wendy, because oftentimes parents don't know the difference between a tutor and an educational therapist and whether their children are getting the appropriate level of support that they need to address their areas of struggle.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that's such an important concept because there is such a difference between an educational therapist and a tutor. As educational therapists, we're really trained to provide those interventions for the students so that we actually really are taking a look at where are the students' goals and what does the student need to work on so that we are really making sure that we're addressing reprogramming in a sense of those neural pathways, because there are programs that really help to structure the learning for students. And a lot of parents don't know where to look for those programs. They may hire, a lot of times they'll hire a high school student or a tutor that they find, and the tutor is just reading with the children. And one of the things that we do as educational therapists, it's very prescriptive. If you come to us with a report, we're able to take a look at that report. If it's from the school system, we can take a look at that report as well. And if it says there's a language-based, something happening with a language-based disorder, we can really take a look, and we actually can dive a little bit deeper and provide some more assessing as well to kind of really pinpoint those areas where the child needs to work. And then we can really create a targeted intervention plan for your child using those programs that have evidence and scientific-based research behind them in order to move the needle for these children. And so that's really why an educational therapist, when you are having a child that has some learning difference that's happened, that has been diagnosed, working with an educational therapist will help to move that needle quicker, because we really understand working with different children and their learning needs, and then really how to create a plan that best meets the need of that child.
And I think that's so important that the plan is individualized, because, a child who has a reading difficulty and attentional difficulties is going to need a different kind of support than a child who has a reading difficulty but no attention problems, right? And so it really has to be prescriptive, like you're saying, in terms of what that looks like. And
it really does. I'm sorry.
Yes. No,
It
go
really
ahead.
does. Oh, it really does. And one of the things that is really we can do in our practice as well is, since it is very prescriptive, if there is a language-based disability, as well as maybe you have a combination of ADHD with that, we can create our sessions so that the child is being stimulated in a way that really fosters their learning. So in addition to creating a plan for the academic language-based disorder, we can also, if it's dyslexia, we can also provide an intervention plan for that, but also make sure that we're adding in maybe some quick breaks or different fidget tools that they can use throughout the session, so that chunking assignments or chunking the work that we're doing, layering it, visual models, so that they're feeling empowered also, so that their body's also getting what they need throughout the session. And so that's something that we can also do through our research as well, understanding how an ADHD child works, or any other child who comes with a different degree of problems. But we really work with families to find out the best way that their child learns, and everyone working with the child. So if the child is working with an occupational therapist or a speech pathologist, we really will work with the entire team to create a very cohesive plan so that we're using similar language, that we're using similar strategies, so that the child has a cohesive plan in place in every environment that he or she goes to.
One of the things, so my kids are also special needs. They also have ADHD. And I remember in first grade, my son's teacher had ADHD as well. And when she told my son that she had ADHD, he was like, really? Wow. So it felt like, okay, we had the same brains, but she was so amazing in helping us implement his IEP. And she was even doing things that wasn't even on his IEP. So when we had his IEP meeting, we were able to add it in. Whereas instead of having 6 different math problems on one piece of paper, she said, block out 5, and all he can focus on is that one. So I just love that there's such a need for special needs teachers. I mean, if they have special needs, I think it's so important to let the kids know, say, hey, I struggle as well, and here's how I implement these. And sometimes you'll see kids with messy desks and you think, oh, they're just, it's just messy, but there's so much more going on in the brain, and sometimes helping them just process through, okay, let's do a brain dump and let's, clean up your desk and let's process, because sometimes that could take away from the attention too. Like there's so much going on in their brain, they can't even focus on the work as well. So I just love what you do and how you support the families as well.
Thank you so much. I think that it's really important for me too, to make sure that the kids feel empowered as we're going through this work, as you're saying with your child, and understand even looking at one problem can be, the child can feel successful looking at one problem on one problem on a page, and then maybe they look at the next problem. So just really being able to be impactful there. And then executive function is another area that a lot of times is really important too. And so we work a lot with students on that, with organizing their thoughts. Even there's workspaces. One of the things that I like to do with kids is have them take a picture of how, kind of that before and after picture, which you probably did, Wendy, with the decluttering, a before picture of your desk, bring it to me. And then we can kind of organize it the way that, because I do a lot of school visits now too, that I can go back on campus, and then we can take a look at their locker or their desk, and then they can organize it the way that it needs to be organized. And so that they can have this picture to refer to of how they want things to be organized in their desk, or you can do it with their binders and things too. But I find that a lot of times children, the visual learning piece is really important, impactful for them too.
Sometimes you can look at 2 different children. I worked with a family this week. One child was very disorganized, and one child, she actually became my little organizing assistant, helping me with her brother. And the thing was, I told her, I said, when I was in high school, I was so overwhelmed. And on Friday afternoons, I would become so stressed that my way of getting organized is I had to decompress, and I would clean my room and polish my furniture and do my laundry. And she said that's exactly what she does as well. Whereas her brother would be like, it's a Friday afternoon, I'm stressed and I'm going to sit in my clutter. But so many times kids learn very differently. So I love what you mentioned, taking that picture and saying, okay, when you're going to reset, here's what you want it to look like. Instead of saying, I have no idea what I did before. I knew we decluttered, but I don't know how to do it again. And having that after picture and the before, okay, this is the before, but here's what we want to get to for the after, and help them create those processes to get there.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And I love that you both are really talking about that executive functioning piece, because we're talking about neurodiversity, and we're talking about kids who come in and they struggle for a number of different reasons. And like we've been saying all along, all day, is that these kids also have extraordinary strengths. And oftentimes there's an overemphasis on their struggle and a lack of identification of their strengths. And I'm glad that we had a chance to talk about that during the course of previous sessions. And it sounds like, Shanna, that knowing their strengths is helpful for you when you're deciding on how to support a child who may have struggles with reading, but has a really great visual memory, or struggling with executive functioning like we've been talking about. And I know we're going to continue talking about that particularly, but how do you use their strengths to help them with their areas of weakness?
Yeah, using their strengths is one of the most important parts of working with the children that I work with. I really come with every child, I look at them in a very positive light. And so I ask them, the first session with me, I take time to connect. It's really important to connect with each child in the first session, really find out what they like, really find out what they're interested in outside of sessions, really find out what they're, you can just really ask them, what do you like to listen to for music? What do you like to do for fun? What are your sports that you enjoy? And then I have a conversation with them. We do a range of really getting to know you activities. What is a goal that you have? What is something that you really want to do? And it doesn't even have to be academic. It can be, maybe they want to learn how to do like a flip in gymnastics, or maybe they're really working on that basketball skill. So I ask all of those questions and we talk about that in the first session. And then I incorporate that into sessions. And so if I have a child, for instance, I have a child right now who loves basketball. I mean, he practices day and night. He does basketball a lot. So we incorporate that into his sessions. And so as he's, he needs brain breaks as well. So I have a basketball hoop and we have a gym here in my clinic. So we'll go and we'll shoot some hoops. Or if we're working on some skills, even with dyslexia, we can actually segment words and shoot hoops and spell words and things. And so I incorporate that into his session, or I find, literature that is prescriptive for where he is, that really that he or she's interested in. So you can bring that into the sessions too, that is aligned with what their goals are. And so for each student, since it's so individualized, I can be working from basketball with one student to I can be working with, I have some kids that really are into like cats or little, like My Little Pony, things like that. So I can kind of really work that into the sessions. And then the other thing I do with all of my clients, small and older clients, is they have them set goals. And I think that having students set goals for themselves is empowering, not just academic, but for their sessions. So we'll kind of take a look at where they are when they start. And then I always, every couple of weeks, kind of take a look at where they have gone. And they love doing that because they really can see how much they've grown. I do a lot of charting or graphing. So that's one nice way to do it. So we can kind of see, if I'm working with a child who is really working on decoding maybe CVC words, we can say that the first time when we look, they maybe read 5, and then this week they read 20, but they can see that progression, and that visual piece again is important. And so just really keeping it positive and fun for them is important in our practice. And also they come to you, a lot of them come after school, so they're tired. And so, and they know that they've had a long day of struggling at school. So when they get here, one of my main jobs is for it to be a positive space, a fun space. And sometimes they just need to decompress. And that's fine too. Like for the first 10 minutes, maybe they need to jump on the trampoline or shoot hoops or sit in my cozy chair and just curl up with a stuffy or a book. But those are also important things to consider for our children also, because if their brains are stressed and they're feeling anxious, then they're not ready to learn. And so kind of following their lead also, because I'll have kids that I have an entire agenda, but they come to me and there's something that they need that day. So we really follow the child. And I think that that's one way that kids can really attain their goals as well.
And it seems like that's a great way to meet the child where they are, because I love what you said about the fact that when kids are stressed, that they can't learn, and it interferes with learning. And I know we're talking about support outside of school, but I know there are a lot of educational therapists who actually work in the schools, collaborate with the schools. I think that works really beautifully when you can do that. But just the opportunity to just decrease their cortisol levels, because so many of these kids are chronically stressed. They're sitting in that classroom. They do not want the teacher to call on them to read out loud if they have dyslexia. They know that they're always going to get in trouble if they're missing information, if they're asking the same question over and over again, if they're staring out the window. And so there's this chronic state of stress, which impacts them. And it's really hard to learn when you are feeling stressed, when you're feeling anxious, or when you're feeling fearful. And so coming into a space with someone like you, Shanna, where they can, just de-stress, but then also learn, is so empowering. And then to see their growth motivates kids to continue to work hard. And I mean, that's part of the growth mindset, is like, look, you couldn't read more than 5 words then, but look, now you're reading 20 of those words, right? So they're seeing the growth, and that shows them that they can grow, that they can improve, which motivates them to continue to work hard, which I think is such an important thing to convey to students who have struggled, because they can feel really beat down by their struggles over time.
And I also talk to parents about, I also talk to parents about looking at their child individually too, because I think sometimes we're trying to move really quickly because the school wants us to move really quickly, or someone else wants us to move really quickly. But if we take a look at our child and their progress, it's huge a lot of times. It may not be at the specific benchmark that the school's pushing us toward, but sometimes I feel like we have to slow it down and really just take a look at the child, because we're all rushing to do so many things. But when we slow it down, I feel like I've talked to parents, just take a breath and we'll slow it down. And we look at their child and they're like, wow, they really have come a long way. And so we can have those conversations with the schools also. And I do that a lot with my clients, is we want to look at where the child is, take a breath, and we'll keep moving the needle forward. But we can only move the needle we can only move at the child's pace also. We can't rush things. It is a process. It takes time, and it takes a level of really being strategic about what the instruction is that we're providing in that therapy, but also in school too. So what are we doing in both areas so we can really allow the child to thrive?
Wendy, did you want to say something? I know that you had.
Yes. So I always talk about time blindness. Sometimes we be like, oh my gosh, so much time has gone by, or I've been trying to declutter my bedroom for over a week or a month or a year. And then they feel so overwhelmed. And it's like, you know what, we're just going to take it one step at a time. So I don't do more than a 3-hour session, and halfway I'll set an alarm. So I set alarms for everything. Otherwise I'm going to be late for things if I don't, because I get so hyper-focused in what I'm doing. If the alarm is not set, then you're like, oh, I missed that appointment, right? So sometimes I'll tell the child, okay, I know this is a 3-hour session, but what we're going to do, we're going to break it down into small bite-sized pieces. So we're just going to do your clothes, and then we're going to take a look and see how much you've gotten done. So sometimes they think, oh my gosh, this is going to take me forever. And I'm like, no, it's not. We're just going to do one small thing at a time. So I love that when you tell the parents to just take a breath, because when I come in, they'll be like, look at this room, look at all this stuff. And the anxiety is even worse, because now the child is like, oh my gosh, you're telling a stranger about my issues, here in the room. Right. So just love that it's like, we're just going to work together. We're going to take small breaks. We put on music. I'm like, Taylor Swift, all right, put it on. Let's because when you get your mind, unfocused on, oh, I have so much to do, sometimes just listening to music, like you say, shooting hoops, and you're still learning. So throw on some music and start working on those projects, small bite-sized pieces at a time. So when you get to the halfway mark and you look up, you're like, wow, I have 2 bags of donation. I have all this is trash, and here's what I have. So those small bite-sized pieces are so important for everybody. The whole family should just break it down into small bite-sized pieces, and not think that you need to be at a certain point at the end of the day, or the end of the month, end of the year.
Right. And, many of our neurodivergent kids struggle with executive functioning. So when you talk about time blindness, that's part of that. And executive functioning, for people watching who may not be aware of the term, I know many of you are, it's like this big umbrella term for a lot of different things, but all of those things are needed for our transition through childhood to adulthood. And we continue to use those skills. It's things like organization and planning and prioritizing and time management and getting started on tasks. Just task initiation can be an issue for so many of these kids. Executive functioning difficulties are frequently seen in autistic children, adolescents, and adults. And individuals with ADHD often struggle with executive functioning. And I love how you talked about that feeling of being overwhelmed. When you use the example of a closet, seeing that messy closet and being overwhelmed. When kids who struggle with learning can feel overwhelmed, but with all the work that they need to do. I've got this math test, I've got this book report due, I also have to do my science reading, and I have to, help with the announcements for the class this week. And when kids feel overwhelmed and they don't have the frontal lobe that's effectively able to organize all that information and prioritize it, oftentimes they shut down and they don't do anything. That's why you have a lot of students who don't turn in assignments. It's not because they don't want to, it's not because they're bad kids. They can have the full intention of doing these assignments because they want to do the work, but they look at all the things they have to do and it's too overwhelming. They don't know where to start because they have task initiation problems. They don't know how to organize what it is that they need to do because it's too much. And they will turn off their computer, they will go on YouTube, they will text some friends, they will procrastinate and delay. And then next thing you know, they have 10 missing assignments for school, right? And so it's really important to recognize that when you see those behaviors, that it's not intentional. It's not someone who's willfully saying, I refuse, although that can happen. But since we're talking about kids who think and learn differently, for them, it's just hard. And without the support in place to help them through that, they will continue to not progress the way that we want them to and that they want to.
Mm-hmm.
So many times that the assignments are done, she just didn't turn it in. Right?
I see that
was
too.
my son. I'm like, the assignments are done. You didn't turn it in. I mean, we homeschool now and he's graduated, but so many times they were like, you're missing all these assignments. I would go onto the computer and look at his grades. And I'm like, where are all these assignments? Oh, they're in my backpack. Well, on Monday, you need to turn them in, so sometimes the assignments are done. The next step, they're stuck on, turn it in. And sometimes not even asking for help. They know they don't understand the work, but they don't want to ask for help because they are ashamed to ask for help.
And I think also one of the things that's important for everyone working with children to think about is really changing that mindset. Because I think, back when we were probably children, if you didn't turn in an assignment or something happened, you would get this really bad grade and people would think you were lazy, or they would think that you just didn't turn it in. And then, but shifting that mindset for all the adults working with the children of having this understanding that, yes, some kids are really struggling with executive function, and how can we support all kids so that they are able to address that executive function need and thrive in the classroom. Thriving in the classroom is part of the, turning in your assignment or finding where the assignment is to turn it in. And I find that sometimes kids are feeling ashamed if they feel like they did something wrong on their assignment. That's another time when they may not turn it in, because they're afraid to ask for help on the assignment, or they've been struggling, so they think that they did it wrong. And so they'll bring it into my office before having to turn something in, especially my older clients, to make sure, because they don't want to they always use the term, I don't want to get in trouble. And so I think empowering them to kind of look through their homework, and then also the teachers working with them, changing that mindset of how can we help them feel good about turning in something. And if there is a mistake, it's a learning opportunity. It's a learning opportunity for them to get some feedback from the teacher. So that they can kind of correct it and they can learn, and knowing that it's okay. It's all part of a process. So it's just really a part of a process, and there should not be a stigma around making mistakes or, having trouble with executive function, because I think we all in some way have a little bit of trouble with executive function. And so just kind of naming that is important too.
Right. And I think it's important, given the nature of this summit, to recognize, and I mentioned this previously, that a lot of our kids, our little Black boys and little Black girls, are also going into the academic environment having internalized a lot of negative stereotypes, right? And so if you also struggle with learning, with processing information, have attention challenges, and you're bringing in, those stereotypes of Black students have lower intellectual functioning, or they're more aggressive, or, they're more angry, they act out, they have more behavioral problems. You bring all of that in, and then when you struggle, it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, well, now I am what they say about me. Right? Without recognizing that this is a learning challenge that 1 in 5 kids have, regardless of what they look like. And I think that's an important piece to bring to the table, because it's like an added burden for Black kids who struggle with learning.
I agree. And I
let's
think it,
out,
oh, go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Wendy.
out those people that are in your corner. If you, and recognizing like, okay, this person over here is always talking down to me, making me feel stupid, making me feel less than. I need to not listen to this person's voice and seek out more positive people that are like, look what you did. Oh my gosh, you got a B before you got a C, you know? So, and keep reinforcing those positivity into the kids and making sure they recognize, listen to the voices that will motivate you, not the ones that's always going to be nitpicking and degrading all the good that you're trying to do in this world. And the other thing too is that I remember working with a couple of high school kids that was like, I'm so overwhelmed. School just started. They're throwing syllabus at you. They're throwing all this stuff at you, and you expect to figure out how to process and turn on all these assignments. So I remember even working with my son, say, okay, here's the big syllabus. Let's pull out all of those assignments that's due. So you're not starting it the day before it's due, right? You're putting those deadlines on your calendar. So a week or two before the assignment is due, you get started. And then you start making small progress towards it. Now, some kids, they thrive on night before. I can't help them with that. But those that are like 2 weeks out, yes, let's get started on that assignment and start chopping away at those big assignments. So the deadline doesn't come and then you're overwhelmed when you didn't really need to be.
Shanna, you're going to say something?
Oh, I was going to say that one of the things I tell families too is get a team. You know, if you have a really strong team and an advocate for you and your child, that can also really go a long way as far as making sure that we are representing our child at the school and making sure that we're like knocking down those stereotypes and those stigmas that are at the schools, and making sure that we're providing the school with really specific information about the child and how he or she learns, so that they can be able to provide the specific intervention so that we don't see some of the behaviors that may come out or things that, or it can be, I think you said before, Karen, sometimes it's like the self-fulfilling prophecy. We want to not even have that start. So we want to make sure that we have someone advocating in that child's corner all the time that is knowledgeable about how the child learns and works. And even if it's an educational therapist that's coming on campus, you know, once a week, working with the school and the teachers or your family, so that parents know the right questions to ask, who to ask the questions to, how to provide information to the school. And I think I do a lot of coaching on that with my families as well, because they'll come in and say, you know, we had something happen at school and my child feels really uncomfortable now. And I find I have these conversations with a lot of my Black families, and I say, well, let's go to the school and we can have a conversation. We can have a really proactive and positive conversation about what's happening. And I think a lot of times, especially when you have learning goals and things with the school, you can have those conversations. But I think people are afraid to go into the schools sometimes. And so it's really nice to have people that can go in with you. I think I see a question.
Yes. What are some examples of a good advocate? Do you mean counselor, lawyer, social worker? Just wanted to clarify. I think that can look very different, but Shanna, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can take that one. So it can look very different. I think it can look very different. So in terms of advocacy, if your child has one of the things I do for advocacy for my families is if a child has a neuropsych report or a report that's done through the school, I can go in as an educational therapist and really address what needs to be happening in the classroom for that specific student and that specific plan. So if a family's feeling that they can't go into the school and really understand all of the language in the report, I can go over the report with them. A lot of neuropsychologists will go over the report, but I can go over it with them again. And then I can also go into what my plan will be for educational therapy sessions. And I can also go in with the school and talk with the teachers with them and kind of be on the ground, because a lot of times I go into schools as well. So I can be on the ground helping in that way. It can look very different. Sometimes I know for special education IEPs for public schools, some parents will hire, there are advocates out there that can come to IEP meetings and things like that. I go to those a lot of times with my clients and I'll advocate. If I know that a client has a learning goal or an accommodation that should be added to the IEP, I also go and I make sure that those are added onto the IEP. I attend a lot of my clients' IEP meetings. And then in terms of a special education lawyer, I know some clients do use special education lawyers in IEP meetings with the public school system. And I've sat in on those meetings. I also, as an educational therapist, I kind of coordinate an entire team. So I do have special education lawyers that I do work with that can work with families. And I think that sometimes families feel like they need that. And I can refer to that level of expertise, but really my role as an educational therapist is to really make sure that I'm advocating for what the child needs in their IEP for a public school or an educational plan for a private school, that everything is in that document and that it's being followed up on. Because after the neuropsych report is written, it's passed off to the schools and the educational therapists and things. And I'm really the person on the ground making sure we're doing what we're saying we're doing on this report so that the students' needs are being met. Does that answer that question?
Yes, it does. And for families where maybe they don't have a private neuropsych assessment, advocates can also look at the school assessment and say, if they say, we're intervening, we're going to provide this amount of resource support, an advocate like yourself or someone else can take a look at that IEP and say, well, what are you actually going to be doing during that 30-minute resource session? And then helping the parent understand how that ties to their child's area of struggle, and also providing some guidance in terms of, well, that's not going to be enough to move the needle for your kid because they have dyslexia. They need an evidence-based multimodal phonics program to address this phonological struggle that your child has in terms of processing that kind of information. And so that they can go in knowing this information can help you advocate for what your child really needs. And then also if a child has, reading struggles, but they have unidentified attention issues, someone else can go in and say, well, this is not appropriate for this child because not only do they have struggles with reading, they have problems with attention. And so this hour-and-a-half long session is not going to work for this child. We have to do it a different way. And I think advocates are also helpful when parents look at their IEP and feel like their child is not getting enough support or the assessment wasn't sufficient. They can kind of coach the parents on how do you get additional services? Because so many parents will say, oh, the teacher's reading with my child every day before school, like I mentioned before, but it's really not moving the needle. So that parent may need an independent educational evaluation to really identify something else that might be going on that might have been missed by the school. And so having that information, parents can now ask for what it is that they need. And if they don't feel like they're getting what they need, can have someone in their corner, like you're saying, Shanna, to help them advocate, help them write the draft, help them write the email, know who to send it to so that they can get their needs met.
And I think one of the things too is also knowing that as a parent, you can call a meeting at any time. And I think sometimes parents will wait and say, well, let's just see. And I think teachers sometimes will say, well, let's see till this. And as a parent, you can have the advocacy of saying, no, I want to hold a meeting now and I want to reevaluate because I'm not seeing the needle move. And so being able to say, as an advocate for your child, saying we're going to hold another meeting, because if you have an individualized education plan, you can have a meeting at any time and reevaluate the goals if things are not working. And so empowering parents to know that and saying, we really want to have a phonics-based program and part of that reading block of the 30 minutes of services that they're getting. And so having advocates to be there with you to kind of really lay out why and how that would support the student is really important.
And I think a lot of parents don't know why, right? Because we don't share a lot of information about effective interventions for kids with the general public. We just don't do that very well. And so parents are left to their own devices to kind of find out, well, it sounds good. They're getting an hour a day of support, but then it might not be appropriate for what their child needs. And so it's important for parents to have someone who can, again, give them some guidance in terms of ensuring that their child is getting the support that they need in order to thrive. Wendy, you're going to say something.
Yes. So with my son, he knew that the IEP, he was getting special treatment, So he was getting pulled out during classes. He was able to use text to speech because of his, his writing. And one of the things that, and include the child too, in the IEP and what their resources are, able to use a calculator, because he's going to be singled out, and it's okay, because this helps him be on a level playing field, right? So many times we'll be in the IEP meeting, and I said, it's in the IEP, but it's okay if the teacher decides, you know what, your writing and your spelling has gotten really good, that you don't need a text to speech anymore. It's okay at our next IEP meeting to say, let's graduate him out of that, or let's keep it in, but utilize it as needed. So it's so great to bring the child alongside as well, especially if as a teenager, they know when, I'm getting special treatment, but I need the resources as well. So include them in the IEP and let them know what their resources are. And it's okay for them to use those. And instead of saying, okay, I'm failing math, well, I'm using a calculator. Well, no, you know what I mean? So sometimes it's difficult to do that little dance too with a teenager who knows that they need these resources.
Right. And that's why I think it's so important for children, for teens, to understand their learning profile, right? To know what their strengths are, know what their weaknesses are, because then there's even a greater motivation. Shanna, you shared this great story about a kid you're working with and how he came in just ready to learn. I'd love for you, obviously we're not going to mention his name, but how he came in ready to learn.
Yeah, it was really empowering for me too. He came in and was telling me, this is what I want. He came in and he was like, this is what I really want to work on. And I really want to work on encoding and spelling. I really want to learn how to do that. And I said, okay. I was really happy, because the first thing he said, it was his first meeting, and I was asking him about himself, and he said, I really just want to learn how to spell. I really just, and so I said, okay. So I brought out all kinds of materials to show him, and he was so excited. I mean, it was the best. And this child is a middle school child, and it was like I had brought out Twizzlers or anything, he was just he was like eating it all up. And our session went by really fast. And so he's like, oh, can we do more than that? He was so excited. So we're going to dive in, and I'm going to make sure that he knows that, but he's empowered to really move his own needle. And he was saying to me, I really want to be able to, when I'm working at school, I want to be able to work a little faster. And I want to, these are things that I want to do when I'm typing or when I'm telling a story, because he can really tell great stories. He loves podcasts. And so he was telling me, I love podcasts, and, and you have to write scripts for podcasts and like the questions and things. And he was really interested in that. And so being able to, that's something that I can also intertwine in sessions. I mean, talking about kids' strengths is, as we're reading and spelling, we could even talk about writing scripts for a podcast. So those are some things that we can, that I'm thinking of in the back of my mind for him, but just, getting that buy-in, especially from your older students, of what they need to work on, and then having him put a plan in place for how he's going to apply that during school. And then also talking with the school and having them make sure that the plan that they have in place is being administered in all of his different classes. Because I think in middle school land, there's different teachers, right, that are working with students. So making sure that he's being supported in that plan, and that the teachers know how motivated he is to do that.
I love that story. I just love it.
I'm really excited to see where his growth goes. And it's so rewarding to me when I see clients come in and take agency of their learning. And I went home and I was thinking the whole night, I'm thinking, I cannot wait to see what he does. He is going to be a change maker in our society and our world. And I cannot wait to see where he takes this, because he's so bright and intelligible. And I'm excited.
And I'm excited too. And I'm excited that he now knows about his learning profile and is not feeling like I'm dumb, I'm stupid, there's something wrong with me, but my brain is wired differently. I learn differently. I've got these incredible strengths. And now I'm going to have the tools to do what I want to do, which is so empowering. A question. Oh, yes.
I was gonna say, and when you think, I always think about this, when you know that there's like 1 in 5 students have, you know, like language-based disorder, it's one of those things that there's so many children. And
Yes.
so we also, it's really important to like also know that as we're working with these, as working with students and kind of changing how we're instructing students, because if we're thinking 1 in 5 students are diagnosed with dyslexia,
Yes.
that's a lot of students. And so, and there are a lot of really, really smart brains that need a specific type of teaching that is not happening. And so we really need to shift how we're providing instruction so that all kids can really tap into their strengths.
Absolutely, Shanna. We have a question that came in from Jamie. She says, have you seen a practice of where other parents will go with a parent to an IEP for support or a second ear during a meeting? From experience, it's expensive to hire advocates or lawyers. I feel that parents supporting each other is a missing piece. I completely agree. I think the best parent to bring in is a parent who's been through the IEP process with their child. Have you seen that, Shanna or Wendy?
An advocate who's been through the process.
Or bringing in another parent to the IEP meeting, because it doesn't have to be an advocate. It can be just a support person, someone who can hear, because you're so focused on, you know, what's happening in the meeting. Having another person in the room is often helpful as well for support.
I've seen that. I had a client that happened last year, and she had a friend who'd been through the process and had been a special education teacher and had been through the process. And so she also came and was an advocate at a meeting, and that was very helpful for the entire team. I think having her be there was a really nice voice of I had the plan also, and then she kind of looked at it from a different lens also as a parent and as an advocate, and it was really nice, and we were able to get a nice plan on the table. And so I think if families have an advocate of that degree, that can also be very helpful, someone who's been through the process, because it is a extensive process. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming, and to have people as your support team in the room is important.
Absolutely. And so this hour is going by so quickly, but I really want to talk about how support at home is so important, and particularly with families where there's a lot of disorganization, there's a lot of chaos. Bringing order can go a long way to helping kids who struggle with attention, with focus, with anxiety, with executive functioning. Wendy, I would love for you to kind of pick it up from there, because you do such great work in that space.
Thank you so much. I truly believe that life skills is just as important as math and English and reading and all the other subjects. It brings everything full circle. And when life skills, we're not raising children, we're raising adults, we're raising future wives and future husbands that will go on and have kids of their own. And it's so important to bring it home and in the classroom as well, to have that organization piece, and just knowing that breaking it down into small bite-sized pieces, no matter what you're working on. If you have this recipe with 27 different ingredients, you're going to look at that recipe and say, you know what, I'm not making that meal, right? But you know that your life is complicated, things are running and everything is so busy. You want simple, give me the steps. Let's break it down into small bite-sized pieces. So in the home, I talked about the syllabus for school, you're bringing it home, or maybe they have a homeschool room, or they do homework in their bedroom, but how can they really do their homework and study if their room is just so chaotic, right? Their minds are busy, their home is cluttered, it just doesn't work. And so many times moms will reach out and just say, child is struggling, and I think I have ADHD also. I think I was struggling as a child also. And so many times families get their diagnosis, moms get their diagnosis because of their child, and that's struggling. So for me, I always say, let's bring it together as a family, have that family meeting and say, hey, look, I need your support to keep the house maintained. You can issue this to say, okay, the child is going to take care of their room. Once that gets maintained, then they can add on laundry and dishes and all the other stuff. But if they have 10 and 12 different types of chores they have to do every single week, it's overwhelming for them. So always have it start with their personal things, whether it's they love books, have them declutter the books. And I always say, don't just take all the books off the shelf and throw it in the middle of the room, because just for a child or somebody with ADHD special needs, they're overwhelmed just pulling all the books off the shelf. So I always say, take one, if it's in cubbies, take one cubby, pull down those 12 books and go through and say, I want to keep these. I don't want to keep these. Maybe this is ripped. Maybe it needs to go back to the library. So many times there are books, right? Late fees because the book just didn't get returned. Return those books to the library and just start cubby by cubby until all the books are decluttered. So don't just pull it all down. Break it down into small bite-sized pieces. Even if you say, you know what, 12 is still too much, I'm going to do 5. Pull down 5, have it in front of them. When I'm working with my clients and books, they're like, I want to keep all of my books. We can get rid of everything else in the house. Then you know this person loves books. So you pull down 5 books and I will hand them one book at a time and say, what about this book? Is this a keep or is it a donate? So they get to process one decision at a time. And I know I was working with this boy who kept out something that's trash, and instead of putting it in the trash bag right next to us, he took it to the kitchen. So I knew, okay, it was time for a break. Because he would go and put something in the trash and I'm like, all right, come on back. He's gone, right? So have the trash bag next to you so you can put the stuff in the trash, and just know when it's time for a child to take a break. They may not be able to work with you for 3 hours or even 90 minutes. Do small breaks, do the basketball court, do something small, and then come on back and do it. So if you're doing it together as a family, break it down into those small bite-sized pieces. If you're saying, you know what, my child and I were just butting heads, have a professional come in and support them. So I work with clients in person and virtually as well. As you know, I have assignments that's due. We come together and we do body doubling. Body doubling is just more saying we're all going to jump on Zoom and I'm going to ask you, okay, Karen, what are you working on this session? Okay, Shanna, what are you working on this session? And everybody is working on their individual task that has been so painful to initiate. So we all come together. You can turn your cameras off, you can turn your mics off, or you can put on music in the background, and we set our timer for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and we know if it gets done, pick another task to do. You know, so in the sessions, we'll probably pick 3 things we need to work on, and we can say, okay, stop with the first one. If you get done, stop with the second. But if it takes the whole time just to do that one, that's a win also. So celebrate all of those wins as they come in. It's not just we didn't meet the goal. It's all about starting where you are and just processing as you go along.
That's wonderful, because I think, you know, we know that ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety, depression all run in families. And so I can't tell you how many parents I've sat with who, you know, I'm going over their child's learning profile, say, that was me. That was me. And, you know, we've been talking today about early intervention. And, you know, it's often never too late to intervene. You know, Shanna, you're talking about a middle school student getting identified and getting the support that he needs. And, you know, there's a lot of regret. You know, we talked some about shame here as well, about how that can kind of get in the way. And, you know, I've sat with parents who say, you know, I wish I had found you 5 years earlier for my child, because they think they brought their child in too late. And I've also sat with parents who say, I wish I had found you 40 years earlier, because they recognize that they also struggle with the same issues that their child struggled, and they were missed, right? But they feel hopeful knowing that now they can provide the support that their child needs. And so I think it's encouraging to hear that there are things that can be done to really help the kids thrive, whether it's educational therapy, whether it is ensuring that your child is getting adequate support at school, getting support at home for your home environment so that it optimizes learning. It also decreases stress, enhances well-being and mental health. All of that is important. And I think everyone has kind of mentioned working with a team, whether it's a speech and language pathologist, like Sandy, who was on, you know, in the session earlier, an educational therapist, an occupational therapist, and communicating with the school. I think that's important, to not just work in a silo with this child and with their family, but to also, can we communicate what we're learning about this child and their family dynamics that is impacting their learning with the school, so that we can work together for the best outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And then even with the child needing that support, you know, sometimes it would say you have 10 blankets on your bed, you shouldn't need 10.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they do, and that's okay for them to have 10. Maybe they don't want the weighted blanket because that's a sensory issue, right? The little bumps, maybe they don't like that. And it's okay to say it's what the child needs. And sometimes sometimes I kind of teeter on, well, that's not my scope, but here's what, here's how I help my son. And so many times I feel like I'm crossing over and I'm like, I'm not a therapist. I'm not, so sometimes I say, see someone about that. And I love that I have this area of support to say, what area are you in? I would love to, recommend you to someone that can help you in that area. But if your child loves 10 blankets on their bed, it is okay. If they don't like the weighted blanket, that's okay too. Shanna, you mentioned that your students will come into your office and just sit there with Snuggies and things like that. Can you imagine if that's what they needed all day long and they weren't able to have that comfy blanket, or maybe they're a teenager and they can't bring their favorite stuffed animal, right? Or they're like, I really need it, but I can't drag this into school and people are going to make fun of me. But they collapse into your office and that's what they needed the most. So I don't know if that's something that we put into an IEP, maybe something smaller scale. I love those little fidget toys, but maybe they may need a little stuffy, and maybe that could be okay as well. But don't take away what a child really needs to thrive. If they need a stuffed animal right there while they're on Zoom, I know during the pandemic, if they probably had stuffies behind them, wrapped up in blankets, that's what they need. And it's okay for them to have that kind of support.
Yeah. And I think it's okay for kids to know that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask for the support that they need too, and to empower them to also find their voice, and empower families to also find their voice to advocate for their child is so important. And making sure that we keep positive and we really focus on the strengths, because the children coming to us have such amazing strengths and talents that they don't always get to showcase, and kind of really focusing on a lot of those strengths too, to kind of keep them encouraged and moving through this journey. I think I saw a question in the chat that said, how do you, I'm going to go back up to it. How do you help speak on children who have been beat up by the journey and are now very resistant? I think I would really say, we want to really keep empowering them. Focus on those positives, focus on their strengths, find ways for them to feel confident in what they are learning. Maybe it's breaking up an assignment. Maybe it's doing an assignment in a different space in a different way. Maybe it's like having the knowledge for themselves, especially older children, to say, this is what I need. And working with a team of teachers to really advocate for the child. I have one quick story. My daughter's classroom, she has really implemented an entire mindfulness program. And one thing that she's implemented in the classroom, they do a lot of yoga, meditation and things, but she has a period of the day, it's what I need. And she puts on soft music, they can meditate, they can play with fidgets, they can sit out in the sun, they can ask for help with something. And I think that's just so neat. It's about like 20 minutes a day, and she does this. And I went in the other day, and there's a group of students with her. They needed some help with some reading, and they were sitting with her in a small group. And I think she does it every day. And I think it like builds up to like, they can kind of come and ask for what they need. And having kids have those positive figures of asking kids, what do you need? Is so important. And as an ed therapist, and I think even what you said, Wendy, is like, what do you need to make your space functional? What do you need to learn? And providing families and kids with those tools are so important.
Absolutely.
And so we feel like we need to have, so we homeschool our kids, or you'll have these perfect classrooms in the homes, and the kids don't sit there. They want to sit on the swing, they want to sit on the couch, they want to sit on the back porch. And sometimes I'm like, I know you have this, perfect Pinterest room for homeschooling, but if the kids are not going to thrive there, it is okay to use that space for something else. And don't worry about what other people are doing in their homes. Focus on how the kids are thriving in your home. So get rid of the homeschool room, dismantle it and turn it into something else, and create a nice space for the kids to do homeschool somewhere else in the home.
Wonderful. I love that. I love that. This is such, again, great information for so many families. I'd love for you, Shanna and Wendy, to put your information in the chat if families want to connect with you, if educators want to connect with you, other allied professionals. I think the question that was asked about how do you support kids who have been feeling beat down by this journey is going to be answered, continue to be answered in the next session when we're talking about mental health, because I think these learning struggles that many of our students face, these microaggressions, these internalization of negative stereotypes contribute to, the mental health crisis. I think, one of the things we had highlighted when we were kind of developing this summit was that suicide death rates among Black youth have been increasing faster than any other racial ethnic group. And Black youth under age 13 are twice as likely to die by suicide compared to their white peers under 13 years of age. And so we need to address both of these issues together, because we like to compartmentalize, right? And say, okay, we have this learning issue, we have IEPs, and then we have mental health challenge, but they're linked and they overlap. And we can't just address one and not the other. We have to address them both. And we have to realize that both of these things can be occurring. Mental health challenges and learning challenges can be occurring in the same child at the same time. And we know that kids who are neurodivergent, who have learning and mental health, learning struggles, processing difficulties, neurodevelopmental disorders, are at higher risk for mental health challenges. And so we are going to continue that discussion with our panelists in a little bit, but I just want to first thank Shanna and Wendy for coming to the session, for leading this discussion, and for talking about things that are really important. It's like, how do we help our kids thrive? Once we know what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, where their areas of struggle are, how can we then help them to, again, move the needle, like we've been saying, help them to access their curriculum, help them to learn, help them to be motivated to continue the learning process, particularly when things are hard? And how do we support them at school and at home? So thank you both for being here and for lending your voice to this discussion. I keep saying all morning, I've been saying this is just the beginning. We're not going to solve all the problems in one summit, but we're going to stay in touch with everyone, anyone who wants to continue this conversation and is open to more town halls, more discussions, more small group meetings, get on our email list and connect with Wendy and Shanna, who are great resources for your kids.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen.
Yes, thank you so much, Karen. This was a really great conversation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both. We are going to take a short break. I think we're going to take it. Oh no, we started a little bit longer, but that's okay. We are going to switch gears. Wendy and Shanna, thank you so much. And then we have Dr. LaFawn Gordon and Kalisha Baird coming up next to finish out this discussion. All right. So let me just switch gears here, because I'm going to introduce you both. Yeah, this is the last session of the day. It's gone by so quickly. But I'm really thrilled to have you both here to kind of end the day on speaking about mental health challenges, because it's just an area that I think everybody has paid a lot of attention to during the pandemic. But, these issues didn't start with the pandemic. We have had climbing rates of depression and anxiety in kids even before the pandemic began. I think that there's one study that showed a 73% increase in anxiety, 95% increase in depression, in 2018, when they look at the previous 10 years. And all the pandemic did was kind of lift the veil and covered what was already there, and probably exacerbated some of the difficulties that a lot of our young people were facing related to loneliness, social isolation, probably had a significant negative impact. But then we have a lot of pressures on our kids right now, academic pressures, social pressures that are also playing a role in impacting kids' mental health. And so I am going to introduce you both, and then we are going to start the next discussion about mental health challenges. So let me just Get you all ready. Okay, here we go. It's so nice to see you both.
Good to be here, Karen.
All right, well, let me introduce you all to the attendees who are still hanging in there. We started at 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific. And some people have been with us the whole time, and some people have kind of jumped on and off. So our speakers now for the last session, which really focuses on mental health in Black youth, are Dr. Faune Gordon and Kalisha Baird. Dr. Gordon is the founder of Children and Families Incorporated, which is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. She's a licensed clinical psychologist with expertise in child clinical psychology and works with at-risk and traumatized infants, toddlers, and preschool-age children and their extended families. She's a California-endorsed infant, family, and early childhood mental health specialist and has a certification in clinical trauma. She also has conducted numerous professional trainings to parents, teachers, primary caregivers, and clinicians, and teaches at Cal State Dominguez Hills, where I was also a professor. And we also are here with Kalisha Baird. She's a licensed clinical social worker based in Los Angeles County. She's passionate about the intersection of faith and mental health for children being raised in religious families. And Kalisha speaks at churches across Los Angeles County about the desire to be an expert has led her to return to USC to complete another graduate degree. And Kalisha continues to support children and families as they cope with mental health challenges, trauma, and life changes. She has been an awesome resource for so many of the kids that I have worked with. And I'm, again, thrilled to have you both here to have this discussion about mental health, because, you know, before we started, I talked about some of the statistics and would love your thoughts on what is happening with our Black youth and how do we support them?
Yes. I'm going to share this screen here. Let's see. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes, we can now.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kalisha, and especially Karen, for giving us this opportunity to share about mental health, and of course, all of the audiences here to really listen to this, I think, very important topic. And so on the next slide, and we are going to kind of give an overview of, what does it look like in terms of racial disparity with Black youth in particular, in terms of mental health with other groups. And I have to say, oftentimes a population that is overlooked across the board in terms of ethnic racial groups is our children under 5, starting with birth to 5. So just wanted to take a glance at that. And then, as you can see on this slide, we just want to kind of give an overview of an also very important population in terms of Black youth are our Black boys, and what we're doing in terms of their mental health and what they are struggling with. And hopefully we will talk a little bit about what can be effective in terms of addressing their need. And then moving on to Kalisha's part of this presentation, she will say a little bit more about mental health, intersectionality, as well as the negative and positive impacts in terms of mental health with this particular population. And hopefully there'll be some reflection in terms of takeaway, for the audience, and comments and any questions that you may have for us. So starting with the first part, moving to the next slide, just a little bit of some stats. If you think about just Black youth in general, and then looking at children, as Karen was saying earlier, there was challenges prior to the pandemic. And so with the population of children, even 3 years of age to 17, 20% of those children already were identified prior to the pandemic, with all these various issues that Karen has mentioned earlier in terms of developmental, emotional, behavioral, all of these things impacting mental health. Now, 17% of these children of all backgrounds who live in poverty, just think about that for a second, 17% of those individuals, of the 17%, 32% of them are actually African American. And then we also have another 31% who are Indian children. Of the 27% of children with parents who have insecure employment, not always having the opportunity to find employment, of that group, 41% of them are African American children. And so if you start looking at mental health challenges, as was mentioned earlier, many of the common diagnoses tend to be attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, anxiety issues, disorders around behavioral issues, and then depression. So going back to this idea of birth to five, which is the area I am the most fascinated and interested in, and one reason being is there is the assumption that when we think of mental health, we think of school age and older, and rarely do we think of mental health, even for example, a 2-month-old or a 3-month-old, because oftentimes we don't know what does that look like. But the one thing to really keep in mind is that those first 5 years are critical years in terms of development. If you think about even in utero, we have all of these things going on in terms of formation of various organs, in thinking about our brain, just the neuronal makeup. Things are coming together, and all along we have this developing brain where we have the neural connections, and all of the things that are happening on a biological basis directly are influenced by what's happening outside, what's happening in that child's environment and experiences. And so whereas the assumption is if there is, for example, domestic violence going on or poverty, various challenges that families face, the assumption is, oh, well, my baby didn't notice that, or we were talking in another room. And so no, that situation didn't impact the child. And more than likely, there was some influence. And so as this developing brain is occurring and these neuronal connections that are formulating, the environment is impacting this opportunity of a healthy neuronal connection. And so what becomes very important is really looking at the relationships, and for, especially the first 5 years and moving forward throughout life, we really want to look at healthy relationships, the positive ones, the environments that are enriching. All of these things foster healthy brain development as we go through moving in this developing brain at those first 5 years of life. And the one thing to keep in mind with this last bullet is the above cannot be optimized if the child is perceived different from other peers, from other individuals. And so if you have a child who may have some neurodivergent or neural differences on top of all of these other complexities and challenges in their environment, that only adds to the complexity, and it adds to whatever mental health challenges they may face. Okay, so let's look at our young Black boys for a minute. So if you just looking again at some of the stats, where we have Black preschoolers are 3.6 times more likely to be suspended from preschool. So we're not even talking a child moving into kinder or moving into regular school. In preschool, 3.6 times more likely to be suspended. and that's in particular, Black preschoolers. Although Black children only represent less than 20% of preschoolers, we still yet have 47%, almost half of these children make up suspensions. Now there seems to be something wrong with that. And then now, if you look at this third bullet, although 54% of preschoolers are boys, so we have half, we still have the suspension rate is almost 80%. 78% of the suspension are targeted to that preschool group of boys who only make up almost half of the population of individuals in preschool. And then lastly, young Black boys with neuro differences, they tend to be overrepresented in terms of school suspensions. And so when you think of suspensions, we're thinking of a disciplinary action as it relates to someone's perception of conduct and behavior. We're not thinking in terms of mental health. All right, next slide, please. And so really the thing to really take in consideration is, what are we going to do about this in terms of addressing early childhood mental health challenges? And when I say early, we really need to go back in terms of ages birth to 5. And so the first thing to really take a look at is our own implicit biases. You know, whether we are someone who is not of the same ethnic, racial, or cultural group, or if we are the same, we need to even look at the possibility that at times we may make our own assumptions about our own groups that maybe we share culture with, or we may make the assumption about something about a child. Not too long ago, just to give you an example, I remember talking to a preschool teacher who was concerned about an African-American boy in her class who in her mind had lots of behavioral problems, doing all sorts of things in terms of acting out. And when it was pointed out actually to me by someone who I supervised, who said, you know what, Dr. Gordon, I'm in that same classroom, and what I see with this boy is typical behavior or very similar behavior than what I see with various other non-Black children in that classroom. So why is it that he is pointed out in terms of the behavioral issues? And so with the teacher and kind of exploring this with her, like, I want to pay attention to, well, is his behavior different from any other child in the classroom? In her mind, it is. But on one hand, in this particular classroom, he's a minority in that classroom. There's only about 1% of, I believe, for example, he is one of 2 African-American children in this particular classroom, and he tends to stand out because he looks different than the rest of the children. So many of the teachers, whereas that is not their intention, to pay closer attention to him, but you can't help yourself because he does stand out. And so his behaviors may stand out. And over time, it turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy because it's constantly saying his name. Oh, don't do this. Same child, same child. Oh, come back over here, same child. So he starts to get this, this feeling of, wow, I notice I get a lot of attention because the teacher sees me doing various things. So I'm just going to continue to do those things. If this is how my teacher sees me, I might as well continue to do those things. So it becomes easier to identify him as, quote, the problem child, the one with the behavioral issues. And what happens is we neglect all of the, first of all, we ignore typical functioning with this child. And if there is another child in the classroom who really does have some challenges that need to be addressed, we dismiss it because we don't see it. And so it's so important for all of us to pay attention to, some of these things in terms of implicit bias. Another part that is incredibly important is us as mental health providers, us as parents and caregivers, we want to have the opportunity to connect and reflect. And when I say connect and reflect, what I mean by stepping down to that child's level. You know, we look at the world on an adult lens. It's rare when there's that opportunity to say, you know what, I really need to get on the ground. I need to get at this child's level. And I actually need to just follow that child's lead to be able to understand the world from that child's point of view. And really look at, whereas we may understand a particular direction or something that the child needs to do in our communication styles in terms of adults, but the child may not understand that. And so we really want to make sure that we are understanding the world from their point of view, not just only the child, insisting that the child understand the world from our point of view. Because again, developing brain, they're working on these experiences. And then we want to look at, okay, reflect on this. You know, what I see versus what this child sees in this communication style and in this behavior, what are they really communicating to me? If I'm seeing acting out behavior, you know, we often see what's in front of us, but how often do we ask, what led up to that behavior? What happened prior to that event? You know, what we want to do is quickly address the event, and it's almost like a Band-Aid, but we really haven't gotten to the core of what is really happening. What is the child really trying to communicate to us? So then it becomes very important for us to listen and then go back and listen again, because we might have missed something. And again, continue to understand the world from that child's perspective, from that point of view. Not always easy. And the one last thing here to keep in mind, you know, for us in this population is that, you know, this again is a developing brain. The child is, you know, coming into this world, being absorbed by various different influences, you know, and relationships in their home environment, and whatever it is that is a direct influence. It is important for all of us to give this child the opportunity to have a real relationship as far as support. And us as professionals and providers, it is so important for us to be able to defer to really the expertise of that parent, that teacher, that caregiver who knows the child, and to really look at them as the agents of change. You know, not just us as the professional, for those of us who are professionals, because we have this rich opportunity to learn from this child and from the family. So we really want to defer to them in that respect and really look at the world in terms of them being this agents of change. And we are part of facilitating that, the change, and hopefully it being in a very positive and healthy direction in terms of mental health.
So we're going to transition a little bit, and I wanted to begin by talking about what is mental health, because there's so much stigma, and I think sometimes people throw labels, and as soon as they think mental health, they think crazy, weird, lazy, and some of the negative terms that have been mentioned in the previous webinar with the previous speakers. These labels can be incredibly damaging, and so I figured here would be a good starting point. And so we have a definition. It says mental health refers to the psychological, the emotional, and social well-being of a person. And it affects how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. And my personal belief is that at some juncture in the life of every human being on this planet, there's going to be a struggle with mental health. A struggle with how we think, a struggle with how we're feeling, and a struggle with how we're behaving. Now, will it meet Axis 1 DSM diagnosable disorder? Maybe, maybe not. I guess that might be up for debate. But if we can really sit here and even think about our own lives, like, has there ever been a time where I was struggling with my thinking, where I was struggling with the way that I was feeling or the way that I was acting, and did that create some sort of negative impact with my daily activities, with some of my relationships, with, just things that I'm trying to do. And I think for a lot of us, the answer would be yes. And so we can just kind of create more of a leveling. I think we would be able to move this conversation forward as it relates to identifying and addressing mental health issues with our Black youth. First, we have to say this is normal. So that is where we will start. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, there's like these slides are jumping just a bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about intersectionality. And so intersectionality is something that should be considered first when choosing to treat Black youth. And it's a term that's coined by civil rights advocate and critical race scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw. And so she coined that term in 1989. It describes how a person's identities intersect, and there's a lot of overlap. And so it looks like the slide was deleted for this concept, but hopefully you can envision it. So when we speak of identities that are intersecting, what we're talking about is race. So what race is the person? Gender, social class, nationality, geography, where did a person grow up, age, migration status, religion, ability. And there's tons of other identities, and they're all kind of merging and interweaving. And so if we're thinking about treating a Black child, we have to give account and room for this. And so consideration of these intersections will assist practitioners with the development of a culturally sensitive approach. So when we think about treating Black youth, I think the most important starting point is to think about, does the clinician and does the practitioner understand intersectionality? There was a study conducted by Salami et al. It's a Canadian research study, so this may be something that stands out to you, Karen, in 2022. And so a total of 99 Black youth living in Canada were interviewed. Participants were asked to identify the dominant contributing factors to their mental health, and this is what came up. So we begin with racism. The authors define racial confrontations as traumatizing, dehumanizing, and unfair situations that Black people experience solely because of the color of their skin. Black youth internalize it, and then they begin to hate themselves. So self-esteem, self-worth kind of tanks. And one of the quotes that I liked from this article and appreciated is one of the youth said, "I grew up with so much internalized anti-Blackness. God, I hated myself. I wanted to be white so bad. I wanted to have straight hair. I wanted to have lighter skin. I wanted to have smaller lips." The article went on to mention that Black males, as my colleague Faune mentioned, have increased difficulty. The article talked about how they are perceived as thugs and report feeling that they always have to prove their innocence. We can kind of picture that this would obviously take a toll on somebody's mental health, especially if it's a child. So anxiety grows, stress grows, suicide rates, as we talked about, depression, all kinds of mental health diagnoses start to surface and emerge because of this crucial piece that our society still continues to struggle with to this day, racism. So here we have the intersection of race and gender. And anyone working with Black youth should have an awareness of their reality. The article goes on to discuss generational gaps are a factor that negatively impacts the mental health of youth. Black people experience distance in their relationships with their parents sometimes due to generational gaps, and this weighs on them psychologically and emotionally. And so parents are typically concerned with physical health because of the time period in which they grew up in, and children because of the age in which they're growing up in, a lot of times are beginning to prioritize mental wellness. So they're thinking about therapy and counseling, and they're asking their parents, I need somebody to talk to. And sometimes if there's a generational gap, the parent will not get it. So there's a clash of values potentially. One of the youth in the study remarked, because I feel like in the Black community, the previous generations have worked so hard to get where we're at right now, that they didn't have the time to worry about mental health. They had to put food on the table. When children notice that their parents could need mental health support, a lot of times they're less inclined to bring it up because they fear that they will be seen as disrespectful. So this is the picture of a child saying that, hey, mom or dad or grandma, whoever the caregiver is struggling. And I can't even say, like, you might need to talk to someone because now I'm disrespectful or I'm disobedient, and that label is placed on me. Older Black individuals sometimes debate whether or not mental health exists. And so the young person, as a consequence, then avoids talking about this with their parents or with their family. There is still stigma in the Black community with regards to mental health, and it's not always understood. A lot of people still think that it's an abnormality. Many people think that Black people are exempt from mental health issues. And so sometimes, even though we are improving, and I want to acknowledge that, I think there has been so much more psychoeducation and so much more interventions and efforts driven to decreasing stigma, but we're out here doing the work. And we see these people in our offices, and for many of these families and people of color, it is still present. So we hear of notions like, be strong, you got this, be resilient, tough it out. And that could obviously be incredibly damaging to a child who's still trying to grow and develop into their own person. Their brains are not developed yet, and they're trying to really weigh, how do I deal with this adversity if I'm a part of a family, or if I have parents who do not acknowledge that I'm actually dealing with something that would be diagnosed. So here we have the intersection of race and age. Another thing that was brought up was academic expectations and how that negatively impacts the mental health of Black youth. And we see here that Black parents oftentimes put substantial pressure on their children to academically succeed, because academic success has been taught to them and told to them that it assures overall life success in general. And so there's great, emphasis. You have to do better. Like, I didn't get to go to college, so you're going. And sometimes that can create stress and pressure for the Black child. A lot of times self-esteem and self-worth is tied to their academic success. So when performance is low in the school, we see that mental health can suffer. One of the youth quoted, I think being a student can definitely have negative impacts on one's mental health, especially if you're not aware of how to take care of your mental health. And then we have financial stress. And we know that adults struggle financially, and sometimes that struggle can automatically get absorbed by the Black child. So low financial resources can impact the mental health of any Black child, and it's always a looming stressor kind of in the background. And if the child is working, which happens for many of the families that I've seen, the families can grow to depend on the child for assistance, and this creates a sense of obligation, a duty that's placed on a minor, which can impact their mental health. So we see here the intersection of race and class. The article spent a little time talking about the lack of identity, not knowing how sometimes Black people fit into the overall culture, American culture, feeling like they have to adjust who they are, adjust their identity in certain settings, adjust their mannerisms, and that can impact their mental health. And we know with biracial Black youth, they're trying to figure out, where do I really fit? So if mom was Caucasian, if dad was Black, or whatever the races are, like, which one do I feel most aligned with? And really struggling to find a sense of place there. Previous trauma history can impact the mental health of a Black child negatively. And sometimes it could lead to a full-blown diagnosis of PTSD. Other times it could be depression, substance use, or anxiety disorders, to name a few. Religion, the intersection of race and religion. So I want to start with this one with a quote. One of the youth said, for a while, I almost felt, for a lack of a better word, guilty about kind of seeking outside help, outside of religion, because you're kind of taught that, go to God with all of your problems. And it's almost like you think looking outside of God is almost in some way renouncing your faith, which now I know it isn't, but at the same time, I was like, should I not? Am I a good Christian if I do? Such intense internal conflict. In the words of, says participant female, they keep the identities anonymous, which is good. So those working with Black youth must realize that there can be this internal conflict happening, to where they're wondering if they should even be in the office with the clinician or the virtual space. Religion is central to many Black youth, and if they're coming from a denomination or a congregation that has recommended that they stay away from treatment providers, they can feel great shame for their need to go. We have some positive factors. There's a lot of slides that were deleted. I'm not sure why, but it's not displaying, but I'll just kind of read them. Positive factors that impact the mental health of Black youth include a sense of accomplishment. So being recognized for their achievement. I always like to tell my clients, like, do something every day to make yourself feel proud. And that boosts mood, that boosts a sense of mastery and a sense of self-esteem. And they did find a correlation with this particular study that good grades did oftentimes equate to overall good mental health. Openness about mental health is something that positively impacts the mindset of Black youth. And so if they're in families that do not stigmatize mental health treatment and getting support, they can really thrive. And so really what we're advocating for is normalizing conversations between parents and children, and that will improve mental health overall. Positive relationships is a positive factor that impacts the mental health for Black youth. So one of the participants in the study commented, I'm honestly just like, really, I'm just like blessed or lucky. I feel like I have really good people in my life. I have some sisters, like sister figures from my church that are like family to me. And they're really open and transparent with their whole journey of life. And I think, yeah, they've been through a lot. They don't really have a lot of shame because they've just been through a lot and they're very open. So I have people like that I can talk to. They're like my sisters. And that is such a powerful just opportunity that this participant in the study has. And there's so much research that shows the power of social connection for this person and what's happening in her church context. So a sense of community. Youth report that being around others who understood their experience as Black youth was extremely important to their well-being. Another positive factor that was listed as improving the mental health for Black youth was spirituality. So one of the youth commented, most of my life I've been, and it's always been preached to me that everything happens for a reason. God puts you in certain situations for a reason, and you have to go through it. You have to turn to him and go through it with him. And so this female made that comment. And the article went on to talk about how youth reported that spirituality assisted them with staying grounded during times of mental distress. So clinicians have to be, well, I'm not going to go there actually. Let me go to the next slide. So religion, when religious commitment is measured, findings show that Black Americans are more religious than any other racial group in America. So these stats come from the Pew Research Center. They conducted a study in 2021, and this was done in America. The first study was pulling research from interviews that happened in Canada. Now we're switching over to America. And here we find that Black Americans are the most religious group when compared to other racial groups in America. So they're more likely to say that they believe in God. They're more likely to report regular church attendance, more likely to say that religion is very important in their life. They're more likely to believe, let me move this number here, pardon my pause. They're more likely to believe in prayer and to rely on it to help them make crucial decisions. More likely to believe that opposing racism is central to their faith. Black Protestants are most likely to attend predominantly Black churches. And then we find that Black Catholics and adults of other faiths attend multiracial congregations. Yeah, I guess I deleted my last slide too. I'm going to stop sharing the last slide. We have to pull up PowerPoint for just a second. Okay, so if we're thinking about identifying and addressing mental health issues in Black youth, clinicians really have to operate from a culturally sensitive framework. And that's really important, just really having a thorough grasp of all of the things that we just covered and that were mentioned. Mental health professionals must also begin to collaborate with religious institutions to address and to reduce stigma around mental health within the Black community. And then plans must be developed to reduce stigma around mental health with parents. And so I think that if we can do these things, we can begin to identify and address the mental health issues that are coming up for these children. I think after that is, what is saying? I'm having some tech trouble, but I'm going to stop sharing. And I guess we can create an opportunity for people to ask questions.
I think it's a great opportunity. Thank you both. This is such great information. So many things. I love that you just collected all of this information and then leaned into your clinical expertise in working with youth and Black youth. And there's just so many factors. I think the intersectionality component is so important to keep in mind, because it's not just being a Black youth, it's being a neurodivergent youth, it's being a youth from a certain socioeconomic background, a youth from a particular community, belonging to a particular faith. There's so many factors that are playing a role. And I also know that a lot of Black youth are experiencing vicarious trauma from school shootings and police brutality. And I think about that young man who went to go pick up his siblings and was shot because he went to the wrong door. And even though our youth are not experiencing this themselves, we're living in an interconnected society. And so they are also being impacted by all the things that they hear and see and worry about in terms of their own safety.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. And everything is at the fingertips for a lot of these children with cell phones and social media, and they could have access to the news and at the, at a moment's notice. And parents oftentimes are not aware that these things are coming up on their feed, on their TikTok, and just really carrying a sense of heaviness and burden because of the conditions of our society and the slowness of people to really understand how these youth are having to go and move throughout their life.
Absolutely. And I also think about, again, when I think about intersectionality, the neurodivergence. You've got a Black boy who might have impulse control issues related to ADHD. I think about Elijah McClain, the Black boy with autism who was killed by the police because he didn't know how to navigate those kinds of interactions, and what that does for parents. If you're a parent and you're sending your child out into this world, there's fear, and so that can impact your parenting skills and your anxiety level. And we know that the mental health of parents is deeply connected to the mental health of our children.
Yes, yeah. Do we have questions? Oh, okay.
I think
Lots
you both answered so many of the questions during your discussion, but if anyone has a lot of, yes, there's a lot to fear, Gina, but there's a lot that we can do to provide support to parents. I think implicit bias was mentioned, educating teachers about implicit bias and how it impacts. And again, making sure that our children have a safe place to go where they can feel seen and heard and unafraid to express their thoughts, their feelings, their ideas. And because we know that, again, the thoughts are connected to their mental health. So if they can verbalize what it is that they're thinking in a safe place, that can go a long way to providing support.
Absolutely. And one of the questions that I get often is, if a child is African American, do they have to have a Black provider? Like, does that have to happen? And I think my answer to that question is I think there's just an immediate resonance oftentimes if that is the case. Obviously, we can't say that's 100% of the time true, but a lot of times that could improve things. But I think greater pressure needs to be placed on clinicians and practitioners of other races. So there is a duty that we have as providers. Like, if I am meeting with someone who's not Black, of another race, like, I have to do my due diligence to understand culture, really doing research. And I mean, we have so much resources available to be able to do this. Oftentimes I am surprised. I mean, I am floored at people of other races not doing that same research for Black youth. And it could involve anything. It could involve, trying to understand like what it means to be a part of a Black church, and that provider is not Black, so they just don't get it. Well, now the duty is for you to learn through your clients and allow them to educate you, but then for you to also do your own research so you can fully show up for that child in that space. And this is concerning anything that we do not understand with our clients. And sometimes just in talking to colleagues and people that I meet in other spaces, a lot of times that push to educate it through the client and outside of sessions really needs to be improved.
Absolutely. I think we have a collective responsibility to support all the children who need support in order to thrive.
Yes.
So there's a statement Deanna Dove wrote, as a parent of a Black boy, I feel that I have socially stunted him due to my fear for his safety. I feel so guilty. Either of you want to weigh in on that? I think that's LaFawn.
Yeah, also Deanna feeling the same way. My son's 16-year-old, and all of his life feeling like he has to have that extra protection.
Mhm.
And even with him having relationships with, friends who are not Black, and helping him realize that, your treatment is going to be different from your, what you're going to be experiencing. And it has happened in our community, in the community in which we live. It's a predominantly non-Black community, and having to tell him that he needs to, even in this community, of this perceived safe community, there are things that will not protect you.
Right.
There are things that you cannot do. And it isn't fair. And I do feel guilty, as a parent. But I also want to protect my son from the unknown. So I definitely resonate with that.
Yeah, you have this added responsibility to keep your children safe, right? Because safety becomes first and foremost, because they can't thrive if they're not alive, right?
Exactly.
So we have that in our heads at all times. Gina wrote, it's so exhausting to hold these teachers and providers responsible to educate themselves about implicit bias. We already have to do so much for our children, but I know it's necessary to thrive in this world.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. And I think that a lot of this should be, teachers have to do continuing education. I think a lot of these things should be mandatory in terms of developing cultural competency. We have it for our professions, for providers. It should be something that's required for teachers as well, if you're working with children from diverse backgrounds.
Yes.
And even for us,
Yes.
we should not make the assumption just because we're Black,
Right.
that I get them. We also forget that, have we taken in consideration social economic status? Have we taken into consideration even region of the country in which that person lives, and then their background, their early background? So we should just not automatically assume that we are the one that is going to be the change agent or be a part of that change. We also need to check ourselves. I can, speak for my own self in terms of implicit bias, and not realizing, oh my God, I did that too. I gripped my own purse slightly as I passed by this Black youth. And I don't think I'm the only one who has done that. And make an assumption about someone just based on what they look like in their appearance, and yet I look like them. So it's very important to do as much self-reflection as we can, and not assume that we are not any different.
Right. That self-reflection piece it's so critical. So critical. Absolutely. Okay. I'm just checking to see if there are any more questions. I don't think that there are. Oh my goodness. This is such an important conversation to have. I feel like, again, we're just starting the conversation, because there's so much more that we can talk about and discuss, and really moving from, there's a need to move from knowing what it is that we need to do and knowing what it is that we need to be aware of, to action, right? And I think that's how many people see this intersection of race, ethnicity, learning differences, and mental health as a social justice issue, because we need to make sure that all children, regardless of their background, regardless of the way their brains are wired, have an opportunity to thrive in our societies. And we want to work to make sure that that happens. And it takes all of us. I think one of the slides was, it takes, and it's kind of become this thing that people say, it takes a village, but this is why we don't have just psychologists in this conversation. We have licensed social workers, we have psychologists, we have speech and language pathologists, we have educators, we have parents who have ADD and are parenting kids with special needs, because we need all our voices in order to continue to push forward to address these. A lot of these issues are systemic and built into our society, and awareness is one piece, but action is another important piece as well.
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to just share one last slide, just in terms of next steps. I just want to thank you both for being here and for lending your voices to this conversation. It's just so important to kind of end on this note, because again, there's so much that we can do. I think you've both identified that early identification of learning and mental health issues, in the previous sessions and in this session, focus on mental health issues is really critical to getting positive outcomes for our children. Knowing what the barriers are and identifying those barriers so that we can intervene. And because if we don't, then it continues to be a social justice issue where kids with learning struggles don't get identified and then don't get the support they need to thrive. When anxiety is perceived as a behavioral problem and kids are expelled from schools or sent home. And so we want to make sure that we remove as many barriers as we can. And that kind of next steps are just making sure we're advocating for a more holistic perspective, that we're using our gained understanding, again, to advocate for change and reduce harm in our communities and remain committed to equitable care, equitable support across the healthcare system, across the education system, and that we're continuing to work together to build communities of support, because we need that in order to, again, ensure that our children have the opportunity to thrive, particularly in an uncertain and very unpredictable world. So here are some ways that you can keep in touch with us. You can join our email list. We have podcast episodes that speak to a lot of the issues that we've discussed. We talk a lot about social justice and learning, and then have some actionable steps in terms of things that we can do to be better agents of change, right? I think Dr. Gordon, you mentioned that. And then, if you have questions, you want to reach out to our panelists, I'd love for Kalisha and Faune, if you can put your contact information in the chat. But if you've been registered for the session, I'm going to send you a follow-up email on Monday with information about all of our panelists, how you can stay in touch with us, how we can continue this conversation, and how to connect you with resources to support your families. All right, I'm just checking to see if there's, I think that's it. Thank you both so much again. Appreciate all of our panelists and loved ending the day with you both. And thanks for everyone who attended, who thought that this was important enough to be here. And again, stay in touch. Hopefully you can reach out to us. We will definitely be reaching out to you. Like I said, you'll get an email from me on Monday. Love your feedback and have a great weekend. And thanks again.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you.